Welcome into the Rockies Insider. I'm your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, talking about Saturday's Rockies Fest 2026. Big day for news for the Rockies. Maybe not for the roster, not for the folks on the field who we'll see in 2026, but really a franchise type moment, one that provides a lot of great fan service on a day in which 5,000 Rockies fans, rabid Rockies fans, I should say, showed up to Coors Field on a very, very cold day. The weather was better than it was in 2025 when it was snowing, but still really cold. And instead of having the garage sale over at McGregor Square, which they've done in the past, and the card show, instead of that being at McGregor Square, it was all in-house at Coors Field, but that did mean that on the concourse, you had to crowd inside of a very cramped tent. So it wasn't the warmest of environs, but tons of good deals. I'll share my thoughts on what went down at the garage sale. And if anyone here in the chat already popping off a little bit, go ahead and ask away if you've got questions about anything, or if you have comments about what your experience was like on Saturday during Rockies Fest 2026, because again, the vibes were really good. There's been a big change from this organization, not just the front office moves with Paul DePodesta as the new president of baseball operations, the new general manager, Josh Burns, numerous assistant general managers who have been brought in, and people in the scouting department, player development side of things. There's the coaching staff too, which pretty much everyone other than Warren Schaefer, now the permanent manager of the Rockies, and assistant bench coach Ron Gideon is new. Jordan Pacheco also returning, but that felt like that was somewhat of an interim role as he got promoted from AAA hitting coach to an assistant hitting coach, along with Nick Wilson, once Hensley Mullins was relieved of his duties. So this is a really new coaching staff. The vibe's good, not just because of that, but because I think there's also just this change in culture that's happening, and it goes beyond just the front office. There's an area above the front office. That's ownership. And owner Dick Monfort, while it remains to be seen how much he has stepped aside or how much he will step aside, he has appointed his oldest son, Walker Monfort, into a role, an executive vice president role, where he is making a lot more decisions. And so far, since he has taken over around the middle of last year in the summertime, a lot of his moves feel like they've been the right moves. They've been things that this franchise, this organization has needed. And Walker Monfort, got to give him credit. Credit where credit is due. Walker Monfort has been a part of that change. And so you can get in a new manager. You could bring in new assistant GMs, coaching staff. You can change all of that. But the fabric of the organization, like most in professional sports, starts with the ownership. And that is starting to change a bit with Dick Monfort tabbing his son, Walker Monfort, into a much more prominent role. Felix in the chat, how you doing? Jennifer, Jeremiah, Baseball Riz, Wild the Innocent, of course. Wouldn't be a show without you. Go Broncos. Absolutely. Appreciate you dropping by, everybody in the chat. If you've got some experiences you'd like to share from Rockies Fest, please share them with me and the rest of the Rockies community and fan base right now. So Walker Monfort, as I said, really been integral in this overhaul of the entire organization. And one of the things that I know a lot of Rockies fans have been clamoring for is more acknowledgement of the past. Because there's been some great players who have come through Colorado, through Coors Field, through Mile High Stadium, those first two seasons in 93 and 94. And while the announcement was not that we're going to have a Rockies team Hall of Fame, is still something that fills a void for this franchise, for Coors Field, for the city of Denver. Because right now there's no games going on at Coors Field, and there's certainly a lot less folks walking around 2001 Blake Street as there was yesterday. But this time next year, when you walk around Coors Field, you won't just see the player statue out in front of home plate at Coors Field. Now, as Walker Montford said on Saturday during Rockies Fest, we will have 2 new statues. He said on a dais, on a stage with Larry Walker. Todd Helton, unfortunately, under the weather, was not able to make it to Rockies Fest. So I know some fans were a little disappointed, but you did get Larry Walker for the first time in quite some time. So it was nice that Larry was on stage to hear Walker Montford say, who deserves a statue here at Coors Field? And it's hard to argue who better than Larry Walker and Todd Helton. So both the Rockies' 2 Hall of Fame players will be given statues outside of Coors Field. And that is something that sure is long overdue. But guess what? Rockies are trying to right those wrongs in a really big way. And that's really awesome. Lisa, thank you in the chat. Yeah, the Tennessee weather was bad. It's serious cold snap. I know there's already schools that have announced delayed openings for Monday, but Helton under the weather was the reason why he wasn't there. So Rockies are going to get those 2 new statues next summer. You might already want to get your tickets because I imagine it will be close to a sellout, even if the Rockies, and I say if, like we don't already know they'll be out of contention by that point. They probably won't be officially eliminated, at least not when Larry Walker's statue gets unveiled. That's going to be August 23rd. It is a Sunday at 1:10 against the Cleveland Guardians. And the first 15,000 folks who arrive will receive a commemorative statue. So that's a pretty special one because, you know, as much as bobbleheads can move the needle for fans, and you want something like that in your collection, and that's kind of cool. But I mean, in 20, 25 years from now, that Larry Walker statue will still be out in front of Coors Field. It should be, assuming Coors Field is still there and the Rockies don't move to a new home somewhere near DIA or something like that. But that statue will still be there. And to have such a commemorative statue of your own, a smaller version of that in your collection, is pretty neat. So that's not going to change. Even if the next generation or 2 generations from now of Rockies fans don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of Larry Walker, they're going to say, hey, there's that statue outside of Coors Field, and I've got a miniature one at home. That's pretty neat. That's something that a lot of Rockies fans and a lot of baseball fans are going to want to have in their collection. A bobblehead, you could look back and sure, most of the hardcore Rockies fans know Ellis Burks, they know Dante Bichette, all of those names. But if you're not, you might not be too familiar with all of the Blake Street Bombers other than Larry Walker. And if you're not a baseball fan in general, you know Coors Field, you know the Rockies. You may also know the statues that are out front. And right now it's only the player. It's nothing really out in front of Coors Field. But now going forward, people will know the statue of Larry Walker and of Todd Helton. And that will have a lot of meaning to the city of Denver and to folks even beyond the hardcore baseball fans. Todd Helton bobblehead. No, not Todd Helton's bobblehead. The statue for Todd Helton will be unveiled on a Saturday. This will be a night game, a 6:10 against the Seattle Mariners on September 19th. It's the final weekend homestand. Rockies actually play during the middle of the week. That'll be their final home game at Coors Field. A rather strange schedule for them in September. But again, the first 15,000 in attendance will receive a commemorative statue. So I think single game tickets might be on sale already for the Rockies. So scoop those up if you do want to go. Some experiences from Rockies Fest. Felix saying, I met Ryan Ritter and Jaden Hill, and I'm excited about the statues news. Yeah, absolutely. That's really neat. And especially two young guys like that we got a chance to see last year in a much longer roles. And, you know, it's one thing to talk about prospects and hypothesize about how much they could contribute to the Rockies and to the major leagues. And you saw that last year in Ryan Ritter and Jaden Hill and various degrees of success. But you saw that these are 2 gentlemen that can contribute to this roster. Ryan Ritter is someone that a lot of the metrics even think could be a very good, if not just above average, second baseman. You know, maybe he's going to be more of a utility type playing some short, playing some third base. He certainly will learn a thing or two from the likes of Willie Castro, who has been a utility player his entire career. And Jaden Hill has definitely shown in moments coming out of the bullpen that he's got the right stuff to be a late inning reliever. And the future looks bright for them. So I'm glad you got a chance to meet those guys. Hopefully you got their autographs as well. Wild the Innocent saying statues. It's always a good place to meet up with people you're looking for. Yeah, that's true. I think there's a somewhat famous scene from The Sopranos where they go to Yankee Stadium and say, "Hey, meet me by the bat," which unfortunately is not there anymore because Yankee Stadium isn't there anymore. There's a new Yankee Stadium. But yeah, meeting people at the statue, which up to this point has just been the player, a generic player. And now you can definitively say that you've got a couple spots. Meet me at the player, which if you're not a hardcore Rockies fan, you might not understand what that means. You might have to specifically say now, meet me at Larry Walker, meet me at Todd Helton. And now you've got a couple meetup points, right? Where are you at? Gate C. Where is that exactly? Even I myself have to look at a map once in a while about where's gate A and gate C. Wait, is that the home plate one? Is that right field, like third base? Or is it more like the center field, right center field gate, right where the parking lot is? That feels like it's right field, but really right field is at where the Sandlot Brewery is located at. So this will probably clear up a lot of different things, which is really nice. So that was really the biggest news, and that is big news for a Rockies franchise who has not entirely braced its history for the fan base. So that was really cool to see that come out, and the excitement for Rockies fans who are themselves embracing the change in the front office and have been provided a little bit more hope. And now this rather large bit of fan service makes you feel, that much better that maybe this franchise is going to start to do things differently and will care more about the things that fans care about. And that's not to say that Rockies ownership hasn't cared about what Rockies fans think or feel, because they keep their tickets affordable. They keep the ballpark experience very affordable as well. It's one of the reasons why attendance has been as good as it's been the last few years, despite 3 consecutive 100 loss seasons. It's very affordable. It's a beautiful ballpark. Ownership has invested in that ballpark to keep it up to date and keep it looking nice and new. So they have done that part for fans, no doubt about it. But fans, as they should, have very high expectations. And it's not just the ballpark experience, but the things that go beyond that. And it does have to do with wins and losses on the field. Now that's going to take a lot more time. That's not something that can just get fixed in a season, in a couple months. So you have to be patient with that. But it does feel like there's enough of the right things that are happening for this organization that it might get itself back on track and be somewhat relevant. Doesn't necessarily mean that, there's going to be a World Series ahead of the Rockies in 5 years. That could happen, but you just got to get to the dance. You just got to get to the postseason, because we know the playoffs are such a crapshoot that you just got to get there. And there's no better example than the 2007 Rockies, who in the middle of September had to leapfrog a lot of teams just to get the final wild card spot, just to get the only wild card spot at that time. There was not even an NL wild card game or AL wild card game. It was one spot. The best team that did not win the division goes to the postseason, and the Rockies essentially had to win their entire way through. And they did that. And then it's a crapshoot. The last team to the dance ended up getting themselves to the World Series by sweeping the Phillies, by sweeping the Diamondbacks to face off with the Boston Red Sox in the 2007 Fall Classic. So you just got to get to the postseason. That's really all that it's about. And sure, as disappointing as 2017 was, losing the wild card game to the Diamondbacks, especially in that fashion where the Rockies kept battling back, only to have Archie Bradley hit that triple. And in 2018, winning the wild card game in Wrigley Field in extra innings with a go-ahead RBI from one of the least likely hitters in the lineup in Tony Walters. As exciting as that was, it was obviously disappointing to have gotten swept by the Milwaukee Brewers and not to have had only one game at home and losing game 3, getting shut down in the cold. That wasn't fun. The temperatures definitely were not fun there for that game. But you just got to get to the postseason. And the more times you do that, the better odds you'll have of winning a World Series. So maybe the changes that have been made by this front office, maybe the changes that will be made by the new pitching coaches and coordinators that they have brought in from other organizations, a lot of innovative thinkers, a lot of young minds, that maybe that can lead to not only consecutive postseason appearances, but maybe more like 3. Even if it's 3 and 4 years, that would be a major success. Even going to the postseason twice in 3 years would be a success for this franchise, especially considering where they're at. Even if you put that aside, even if you put aside having lost 119 games in 2025 and 3 consecutive 100 loss seasons, and what very well could be another 100 loss season in 2026. Even if you put that aside, look at the history of this franchise. They've only gone to the postseason twice in 3 years, twice. 2007, 2009, and then 2017, 2018. So that in and of itself would be a major rarity, even twice in 4 years, because you got to think a lot of that core from year 1 is going to be the same in year 4. So, the bar I don't think is terribly high. It's very achievable. It's just a bar that is going to take several years to figure out. Apologies for triggering anybody in the chat by mentioning Archie Bradley. That's on me. Hickster, what's up, Jim? Saying Michael Lorenzen, his 8th pitch is going to be the kick change. Yeah, Michael Lorenzen is going to be a nice addition to the pitching staff, I think, for multiple reasons. Not even just pairing with Kyle Freeland and having those two guys at the top of the rotation, but everything he brings in terms of just being a guy who's trying to experiment. Because the Rockies right now, make no mistake about it, they're experimenting. And they should. They should try to figure out some new things. They have an opportunity right now to do a little bit of everything and figure out what works, figure out what's going to stick. That's something that Kyle Freeland said. I want to talk about that. He's excited for the changes that can come about. And if things don't work, it's okay. Go on to the next one. And that's a freedom. That's something that, despite potentially losing 100 games again this year, and maybe getting close to that in 2027, 94 wins in 2027, you would take that. That means you won 65 games. That's an improvement over the 43 you just won last year. But 94, oh no, that math wasn't right. 68 wins. But 94 losses in 2027 is somewhat close to 100. The bottom line is you have an opportunity to learn something. That's one of the reasons why for many years I said the one major strategy the Rockies had never tried was tanking. And you understand, how bad that looks for the sport, but it is a strategy that does have a lot of evidence to suggest, hey, it can be very beneficial. If you lose a lot of games now, it increases your likelihood to win more games later on down the line because of how you stack your talent. And you say, you put a pin on a calendar saying in 3 years is when all of these pieces are going to come together at the exact same time. And it's going to work. So we've got nothing to lose right now by trading all of our best assets away. The Rockies right now are at that point too, where they've got nothing to lose to experiment. They can also go about trading some of their best assets, which I think will happen still over the next couple years. And in this grace period, as we begin to understand what the front office is trying to do and appreciate how they are making certain changes to this franchise, it will all make that much more sense. And so they've got to experiment. That is absolutely a huge thing. Now I want to mention the garage sale because that's always a fun event. And credit to all the people who show up early because as much as I would love to have certain pieces of memorabilia in my collection, I'm not a huge memorabilia guy. Maybe that's just because I don't have that kind of money to spend, but it's a great concept to have, but also to lug all that stuff around can be difficult. Credit to Shannon Hurd, one of the best Rockies fans out there. You might even follow her on social media at Love the Rocks, ROX. She arrived at 7:30 a.m. for the 8:30 showing, for the 8:30 opening of the garage sale, and yet there was somebody who was there 2 hours before her at 5:30 a.m., who flew in from Arizona specifically to be at the event and purchase a bunch of items. I think they had garbage cans for 25 bucks, which feels somewhat like a steal. Like, if you've got a lot of trees in your yard, and you've gotta rake them up, put them into a garbage bag, boom, you've got a Coors Field garbage can. That's a cool item. Now, it's gonna be a pain in the butt to lug back to lot A into the parking lot, or if you had a parking spot on one of the surface streets in Denver, that's going to be a headache. But credit to you if you want an item like that. They also have banners from various events from years past. They had a lot of the vinyl uh, pennants and signage that they had for the Paul McCartney concert just this past summer, or actually no, that was in October. $200, not cheap, but it's a living beetle. That's kind of neat. They had a bunch of player headshots or action photos of them with the player's name that were signed. They were all $20, which was really neat. They had some jerseys, baseballs that were signed, bats that were $100. A lot of them were game used. All kinds of socks, fitted hats that were all $5. Everyone, even late in the day, there was a line. There was a cluster of people trying hats on for $5. So an absolute bargain for me, because I don't really wear a lot of Rockies swag. I don't have too many opportunities to do that. Also, as an unbiased journalist, I just want to report the facts, just the facts, ma'am. That's it. I don't typically tend to get a lot of items, but I got about 6 different pins. One of the pins I got, which was a little more expensive than the others, was one from the home opener back in 2019, which was my first opening day, my first home opener that I was credentialed. So I said, "Oh, let me add this to my collection." That was $5. A bunch of other pins and keychains from the first season of Coors Field. They were all $1 a piece. A the not badge. What's the word I'm looking for? Not decal, patch. A MLB 150 patch from their 150th anniversary season, which was 2019. It's just a thin one. Got one of those for myself. But my favorite item that I got, that I was hoping they would have, because I saw it last year and I was trying to save a couple bucks, even though they weren't expensive. I said, I got to get me one of those green belts, the green player issued belts. So I got one for myself, one for my dad. The one for my dad, I think, actually was CJ Crohn's, because it had the number 25 on it. So I don't know where I'm going to be wearing a green patent leather belt, but I'll wear it once in a while. I'll probably wear it to the ballpark, a baseball belt on my work pants, my work slacks. I thought that was a cool little item to have. So that was pretty neat. Felix hats were the best thing at the sale, in my opinion. What are Felix hats? Felix Hernandez? I don't remember seeing that, but they had, tons of the spring training ones. They had Air Force caps for when they have those Air Force days, but absolute bargain at $5. Garage sale, always a really fun event. I'm not sure if they take some of that stuff and they just goes back to storage, or if they'll put it in the Diamond Dry Goods store throughout the winter before the start of the season. They also had 25% off the brand new hats as well in the official team store at Coors Field. So they had tons of really good deals. So that's always, again, part of that fan service thing of like, hey, you show up, you fare the cold weather, stock up on some merch at a really good price, like crazy good price. Love that. Ugh. Let me wet my whistle here for a second. Oh, yeah, we got to use commas in the chat. Felix, comma, hats were the best thing at the sale, in my opinion. Not Felix hats. That's how it reads. I gotcha. Or at Felix. Sorry, I'm a stickler. I'm one of those guys. All right, again, if you've got more questions, comments, thoughts, go ahead and drop it into the chat. Rockies Insider with me, Patrick Lyons, still with more to say about Rockies Fest, particularly the Rockies player panel and overall just Major League Baseball. A lot happening over the weekend. Now, while everyone was leaving Coors Field, very tired, I saw tons of families that were just not beat up, but they were a bit fatigued because there are a ton of events for kids out there. And as Wild the Innocent saying in the chat right off the jump, I love that the money goes to the Rockies charities. Yeah, I believe they raised $150,000. So that's fantastic. 5,000 folks showed up and raised a ton of money, which you love that. It goes towards a good cause. No one will ever say that the Rockies don't do well by their community, loyal. They take care of their people. So that was really the best part. But as everyone was leaving, the kids had their little balloon swords loaded up with Dinger hats and plush dolls of Dinger and whatnot. I was down in the basement of Coors Field in the press room that you normally see, where Schaefer or previously Bud Black will talk post game, and 3 players were made available to us to talk about whatever the media wanted to talk about. There was, I don't know, maybe about 20 media members there, the typical folks you would expect to see covering the Colorado Rockies, but it was Kyle Freeland, Hunter Goodman, and the newest Rocky, maybe not the newest, that would be Willie Castro, but the penultimate newest Rocky, Jake McCarthy. And, the questions levied at these 3, varied from player specific, their thoughts on things, to the much more broad about, what are your thoughts about last season? And what are your thoughts on the changes? What are you working on? Or what have you been working on during the off season? And shoot, the off season is over, essentially. Pitchers and catchers are going to report on February 12th. So that's 2 weeks away already. And then full squad will be arriving February 17th. And really I should say full squad workout is February 17th because most of them are there from the get-go. Most players, show up days in advance. They're ready to go, but they have to be there by then. And they're usually, even with the Rockies, as much as, they might be struggling right now, and there could be some guys on bigger deals who wait for the last minute to show up. No, they usually are there, really early. So February 17th is the first full squad workout. And the first spring game is right after that, February 20th. Against the Arizona Diamondbacks, as it is each and every year, a Salt River Field tradition. So it was nice seeing the guys again, talking with them and getting their thoughts. There were player panels all throughout Rockies Fest where fans were asking questions, and you got to see all of the guys. Hickster saying in the chat over on the YouTube side of things, which if you're listening to this on the audio side as the podcast, you can still go over to the Rockies Insider page on YouTube and leave a comment. I always get back to those. So let me know what your experience was like at Rockies Fest. But Hickster saying that Ryan Feltner said he was healthy, feeling good. Tanner Gordon, Hickster hopes that he stays in the rotation. So Feltner feeling good is a key one because he was a guy that was supposed to, in many ways, lead the rotation in 2025, especially after everything he did at the end of 2024, where he looked like he was going to be that next guy for the Rockies, where maybe they want to go ahead and lock him up to an extension and keep him around for what would be close to 10 years, which is where Kyle Freeland is at. 2026 will be his 10th season in the majors with the Rockies, something that's rarefied air that you don't see a ton of Rockies lasting 10 years with the franchise. So that's pretty special. That's pretty special. And Ryan Feltner with a solid 2026, maybe he gets himself back on that track. And certainly everybody wants that to happen. Luke showing up saying, bro, Jaden Hill is a unit. He's a big guy. Yes, he could be a tight end probably in the NFL. He's a big, strong dude. We don't typically think of pitchers as having that kind of strength. Like, you want them to be tall, so they've got those long levers so they can throw fast. But Jaden Hill, well built, right? He's an athlete. That's one of the reasons why he was taken where he was in the second round out of LSU, despite coming off of Tommy John surgery. So questions about him staying in the rotation, unfortunately, that somewhat came to fruition, that he wasn't able to keep himself going in the rotation. And some of that had to do with his timeline. Let's not forget that because he was recovering from Tommy John surgery, it was hard to get him on the field his first couple years with the franchise and build up enough innings on his arm. And so the front office, player development side, ultimately decided, let's just shut that down and let's get him to the majors. Let's get him contributing sooner than later. So you know what? Let's just go ahead and make him a reliever, because the runway might run out for him by the time we need to add him to the 40-man roster, or before the time somebody else poaches him in the Rule 5 draft. So let's go ahead and make him a reliever. And we've seen the success that he's had. Brody Brecht is another one of those guys out of the University of Iowa, drafted in the back half of the first round, not second round, competitive balance, round A, where we'll see if he can stick as a starting pitcher. Really good so far in his first full season back in 2025, where he was able to stick it out as a starting pitcher. So already he's got a much larger base beneath him than Jaden Hill was able to have because of that Tommy John surgery. So Brody Brecht, much more favorable that he is going to be able to stick around in the starting rotation. But Kyle Freeland, answered the most questions. And of course, he said Broncos win on Sunday. So you like to see that. But Kyle Freeland was asked about his own changes for 2026. What did he work on? And he basically said, you know what? I didn't work on changing very much, because he started changes at the end of 2025. He and the coaching staff had worked on a couple different things. And if you go back and look at how he finished the 2026 season, the only starting pitcher for the franchise with an ERA under 5, and most guys in the rotation had an ERA around 6.5. But he started those changes in his final 10 starts, like in the middle of August, really his final 9 starts, because let's not forget his start against the Giants ended abruptly after that 2-run home run by Rafael Devers, where he got ejected. That was a start, but let's throw that out. So really his final 9 starts of last season, 5 were quality. And really 5 of his last 6 were quality or near quality starts. He was 1 out shy of completing 6 innings in his final go round at Dodger Stadium on September 10th. 1 more out. That would have been a quality start. So you take those final 10 starts, including the start against the Giants, where he recorded no outs and gave up two runs. So that's going to skew his numbers unfavorably. Still, Kyle Freeland had a 3.86 ERA with most of those starts coming at Coors Field. Remember, there was also that near complete game shutout against the Padres in September when they were gunning for one of the wild card spots. So Kyle Freeland, the changes for him, they started at the end of last season. So he's going to try to continue with that and build on it. And that's important for him because his contract is nearly up. My question to him had a lot to do about his legacy and what he hopes to do for this next generation of Rockies pitcher. And considering that, this is his last year under contract. For 2027, it is a mutual option for $17 million. So both he and the Rockies have to decide, yes, we want to come back at this same price tag. And, I don't know if Freeland's going to want to come back under those circumstances. He may want to, play out his entire Rockies career in purple. He may want to do that, or he may want to finish out his entire pro career with the Rockies. But it may have to be at his price point. especially if he goes out and has himself a really quality season. A 4.5 ERA when pitching at Coors Field with this current roster as it is, I think him going into free agency this time next year in his age 34 campaign, I think he could still go out and get a 2-year deal for close to $30 million from a team. 3-year deal, maybe not, but he has a lot of value, not just to the Rockies, but to other organizations that are out there, especially who have been watching and seeing how he has grown and evolved and adapted through the course of his career, especially as his fastball has dwindled. There are other organizations out there that look at him and say, hey, with a couple more changes, I think this could be a really good quality, number 3 starter, maybe even number 2 starter for a playoff roster, a playoff caliber type team. So that mutual option, could be something that Freeland does not want to come back on because he can get more money elsewhere, or because basically he's just worth more money. And the Rockies would need to pay up a little bit. And if he's going to get 2 years from a postseason contender, he should be able to get 3 years from the Rockies at maybe $45 million. They'll have money to spend still over the next couple of years, since all of these young players that they're bringing up, aren't in arbitration, at least not yet. The likes of Doyle, he's already in arbitration. He could be a trade chip. Goodman will be going through arbitration process, and his contract will start to increase slowly but surely, but that's still another year or so away. So the Rockies have money to spend. And once Chris Bryant's money comes off the books, still got 26, 27, and 28 to go. But 3 years, $45 million for Kyle Freeland to stick around, I don't think is too much to ask, and it would be crippling of the payroll. So my question to Kyle Freeland about his legacy, did involve the fact that, yes, this is his 10th year with the Rockies, but he doesn't have much more to go. This is essentially a contract season for him. And, there's a chance that he could reject his side of the mutual option, which would ultimately make him a free agent. But then the Rockies could turn around and say, we're actually going to put the qualifying offer tag on you, which would also make sense. And then maybe Freeland comes back at that number, at $23 million for 2027. So that's a raise for him. That's something that he would be well within his right. And then if he does sign with another team, the Rockies at least get a compensation pick. That would be a nice win-win situation. But of course, if he does want to stay in purple, that might be an announcement that we hear maybe in spring training. We'll see. I don't know what the conversations are like going on behind the scenes between Freeland's representation and the Rockies. Does the new front office want to tie itself to the likes of Kyle Freeland going forward? Will it be somewhat of a wait and see? Like, will he still have this stuff now in his age 33 season? Could he have enough in the tank for another 3 more years? But it's not beyond the realm of possibility that we could see an extension for Kyle Freeland to stick around for a couple more years and maybe ensure that he doesn't play for another franchise and he becomes a career Rocky. The pitching version of Todd Helton. And sure, while Kyle Freeland is not going to the Baseball Hall of Fame, he does become the epitome of the Colorado Rocky pitcher who's had his ups and downs, but had a ton of success. And that success doesn't look like success in other ballparks and for other franchises. Certainly is going to end up with his fair share of losses, pitching losses. And his ERA is going to be above 4. But for this franchise to pitch for that long, I think a lot of hardcore Rockies fans understand and can appreciate that value that he brings to this organization. So for being a Denver guy, a Denver native, I think you could do a lot worse than making sure that Kyle Freeland doesn't pitch for another franchise. I think that should be important to this new front office, to the Rockies as an organization as a whole, is to make sure that Kyle Freeland doesn't play for another team. Now, granted, you don't need to give him 4 years, $80 million. Tack that onto what he currently has to guarantee something like that. I think you can find something more affordable, but Kyle Freeland, I think, still has a lot in the tank. And we know how left-handed pitchers, they can pitch for a while. Jamie Moyer, of course, 24 seasons in the majors, pitching until he's 49 years old. Obviously, that's an extreme example, but dude was a lefty. Dude got it done. So lefties can take a while, until they hit their best stride. And I think, Kyle Freeland, you can make the argument that maybe he is pitching now better than he did in the first half of his career, excluding the 2018 season, which we know how exceptional that was. But then there were hiccups in 2019, 2020, 2021, 22. They kind of all blend together just a little bit. And I think what he's been able to do now in, I don't want to say reinventing himself, but certainly making enough of the appropriate and the best adjustments he could make for himself, he's done really well to do that. So, rewarding a guy like that who's been a really good clubhouse leader and really embodies a lot of the qualities that the Rockies want to have in some of their veteran players, I think tying up Kyle Freeland could be a really important thing for this franchise. Chat's popping off. Let's go ahead to see what y'all have to say. Luke, yep. Giving some credit to Dick Monfort for letting this all happen. Will Kyle Freeland be the Charlie and stay, or will he try to go somewhere else and get a ring? I think Charlie Blackmon, after he signed his extension, accepted the fact that he would rather be a lifelong Rocky, even in the state of which the Rockies were in. He finished his career losing 100 games in back-to-back seasons. The Rockies had never done that before. That's something that the organization had prided itself on. But when you think of Charlie Blackmon, I don't think you think of him going out like that, like going out in some kind of whimper because the organization was losing so many games. No, he was a franchise guy who played his entire career from getting drafted out of Georgia Tech to going all the way to retiring with the Rockies. And so, yeah, I think that's actually a much better example than sort of the pitching version of Todd Helton, because Helton separates himself as that Hall of Famer. Charlie Blackmon, that next tier, and I think in many ways, as far as pitchers go, that's about as good as you can get as Kyle Freeland with the Rockies. I think that's a great example. Pitching science demonstration, Mickey Moniak and Ryan Feltner was my group. It was reassuring. Yeah, I did not catch that one. That's an interesting one. Mickey Moniak also buzz cut. The hairdo looking a little bit different. Chase Dolander continuing with the beard. So got to see those guys. No big reveal like, Justin Lawrence cutting his hair, but it was really neat. Yep, Jim, sorry you weren't able to make it. It's a cool event. Recommend everyone to go and check that out. And if you're looking for a baseball event this weekend, there is one. You got to make the trek up to Greeley. Hold your nose if you have to. But it's the Friends of Baseball event, the Breakfast of Champions. It's at the Island Grove Event Center on Saturday. It does get started pretty early, I think 8 a.m., but it's going to be Gary Sheffield, a guy who started his career in many ways in Denver with the Denver Zephyrs, a minor league affiliate for the Milwaukee Brewers in the mid to late 80s. And Gary Sheffield going to be there. Tons of great baseball people. There's a training program for kids. And so Clint Barmas is going to be there. Jason Hirsch, who was a member of the 2007 World Series Club. They're also going to get a recent graduate of Eaton High School, drafted back in 2023, Walker Martin, who's a shortstop and middle infield prospect for the San Francisco Giants. He is also going to be there. So you can go hang out with a former first round pick. That's a neat one. Garrett in the chat, thanks for joining. Is there any chance the Rockies would just keep Doyle? Would it take the bat becoming consistent in order for that to happen? Well, I think if his bat gets more consistent, that makes him that much more valuable on the trade front. And so much of this is about timeline because, right now, Brenton Doyle is still relatively affordable where he's at in his first year of arbitration, but he's going to go through arbitration 4 times. So he's going to get more and more expensive. So 2027, his salary will go up, 2028, 2029. After 2029, he he can enter free agency. And at that point, he's going to be 3 years older. And let's not forget, Brenton Doyle, it took him a while to get to the majors. He was an older player. And so he's already, near approaching 30 years old. So is he going to be a major part of this rebuild? Certainly he is for his contributions if he sticks around. But will he be on that 2030 team when it seems like that might be when the Rockies can get themselves back to the postseason? Maybe it'll be 2029. But if it's 2029 is when you first get back to the postseason, Brenton Doyle could be gone right after that in free agency. And if not, he's going to be expensive. So do you want your money tied up into that kind of uncertainty when you have a contender, you have built something that should last through 2030, 2031, and 2032. So that's one of the reasons why, trading somebody like a Brenton Doyle, that kind of asset, could increase the likelihood that you can get to the postseason and sustain that from, say, 2029 through 2032. And it would be nice to keep a guy like Brenton Doyle around, but him as an asset to trade for young starting pitching, I think could be more beneficial to this organization. That's one of the reasons why he has been discussed as much as he's been as a trade chip, because it's a logistical thing. No one's talking about trading Ethan Holiday or Charlie Condon. Those guys have yet to reach the majors. Even once they reach the majors, they're going to be a Rocky for no less than 6 years. Some of them can be 7 years. Brenton Doyle, if he doesn't get traded and he plays his, club control out until he reaches free agency, he will have contributed to 7 seasons. That's just how it works. You need 6 years of service time, not 6 years that you touch the majors. But no, you have to be in the majors for 6 or more years when you look at service time. So Condon, Holiday, Sean Sullivan, Gabriel Hughes, all of these guys you can have for 7 years of club control. Whereas Brenton Doyle, right now, you've got 4 more years. And then after this year, which we know is going to be a lost season of 100 losses, that's now only 3 years left. And then even after next year, how many losses are the 2027 Rockies going to have? They're still going to be pretty far away from the postseason, more likely than not. So then you're talking about 2 years of Brenton Doyle. What value does that have to the Rockies? If you're looking ahead into the crystal ball, 2 years of Brenton Doyle, how much value does that really have? It's one of the reasons why, again, his name continues to float around just a little bit. Also in the comments, hoping the comments Kyle made about things he found at the end of the season pay off. Absolutely. Kyle Freeland, I think, understands that he needs to make changes. He also said that one of the freedoms of having this new coaching staff, particularly on the pitching side, is we can try a lot of different things. And if it doesn't work, who cares? Go to the next thing. Try something else. That's a lot of freedom, right? That's, pressure can be a good thing. Pressure is what makes diamonds. We know that. And there'll be a time, again, there will be a time in which the Rockies have that kind of pressure because they need to win. Right now, they need to figure out what works for them as individual players and as a franchise. And this is a year in which they can do that. And it's something that the Rockies should have been doing the last few years, but they gave up on trying to innovate. They gave up on trying to learn. They got very complacent. It doesn't mean every single person in the organization was doing that. But as a whole, there was not any importance. There was not any urgency on this franchise to try to learn new things and get creative and to innovate. That is all changing right now. Also in the comments, the overall look of Kyle Freeland's career has been skewed roughly by the worst years in team history. Yeah, again, if you're thinking about Kyle Freeland as the leader of the worst Rockies teams, you're looking at it all wrong. Because, again, just look at what he's been able to contribute on the field. And, are you going to get that from Michael Lorenzen? You know what you're going to get from Kyle Freeland. You do. You know what you're going to get. And so you can pay that because you're paying a Denver native. You're paying a great representation to the city of Denver, the state of Colorado, the entire Rocky Mountain region, and more importantly, the Rockies organization. So how many guys can you pay that kind of money to that you're going to get that back? We'll see what Michael Lorenzen is able to do at half the price. of Kyle Freeland this year. We'll see. We'll see what happens. And finally, Rocky's going to shock the world. For real, for real. FanFest gave me hopium. I've never heard of that term, but I do like it. Hopium. That's it. Feeling good about that. Yeah, everyone's feeling good because it just feels like it's onwards and upward, right? They've hit bottom. You know, the analogy I like to use is jumping into the deep end of a pool. And when you get down to the bottom, you know, you're running out of oxygen. But when your feet touch the bottom, you can then push up and shoot to the surface. And that's where the Rockies are at right now. They've done that. They've pushed off. We'll see how long it takes for them to come to the surface and get some fresh air. But they've made that change. Right? We thought that was going to be the case in 2023 when they lost 100 games for the first time, but it wasn't. They kept sinking. They were already really low in that deep end, but they didn't push off of anything. They could have. Kind of sat there at the bottom of the pool, right? Legs crossed, crisscross applesauce, just depressed for 2 more years beyond that. But they've decided, you know what? I do want to jump up. I do want to press up. So that's a nice thing. Also in the chat, CSNORO04. Thank you. I think this might be first time for you. Walker, hopping on the DNVR podcast was a welcome sign. Yeah, absolutely. Credit to Christian Saez and Spencer Smith. They levied, excuse me. They didn't lob. You know, they hit Walker Monfort a little bit. I thought it was good. I thought it was very a fair interview. But yeah, Walker Monfort going on, you know, there haven't been front office members who have done that publicly, and certainly at least not with, you know, a great fan site like DNVR. But Walker, you know, had, you know, said those critical things of his own organization, that they stopped trying to innovate, you know, ultimately falling short of saying they were complacent. But you can see, if you're paying attention to the Rockies, which if you're listening to the Rockies Insider, you already know that I've said that many times, that the Rockies had been complacent, and they've stopped doing that. And so we'll see what happens when they hit a fork in the road, when some of their things that they try to do and innovate, if and when that doesn't work. What are they going to do? Are they going to get complacent and start doing the same things again? Or will they be able to pivot? Because strong odds are that everything that they've put into place right now is not going to work. Not all of it is going to work. It's just not. So they're going to have to pivot at some point. They're going to have to figure those things out and be able to accept that, hey, we tried this and it didn't work. It's okay to admit that. Every time you fail, you have a new opportunity to succeed. You have a new opportunity. Right? Once one door closes, another one opens up. That's just how it goes. So I hope that they're a little bit more honest, right? That I think is going to be really important. Steel 1640 saying, have you heard any talks of Fernandez seeing time at first base? No, I don't see that happening. That's almost an impossibility. Outfielders going to the infield it's not an impossibility, but it doesn't happen. Bryce Harper, of course, the exception, where he's a corner outfielder and he learns how to play first base. He's got that kind of tenacity. He is a baseball rat in that way. You know, I don't think enough has been made of him making that switch to first base, which not only, you know, allowed him to get back on the playing field after having that UCL surgery, after having a modified Tommy John surgery. He couldn't play the outfield. So he said, well, I can play first base. That frees up a spot in the outfield, and that gets me back on the field. It allows me to hit and contribute to my team that much sooner. That's huge, but that's the exception to the rule. Infielders can go to the outfield a lot more easier than an outfielder can go to the infield. So I don't think that's going to happen. That's an impossibility. I mean, look at how athletic Charlie Blackmon was in his career. And there were, you know, some whisperings at various points in his career of like, oh, I wonder if he could go play first base. You know, the Rockies got a ton of outfielders here and there. And it's just not really a possibility. It doesn't happen. You know, it doesn't mean he didn't try. It doesn't mean that wasn't something that was tinkered with a little bit, but the learning curve is far too steep for an outfielder to go to the dirt versus an infielder going to the outfield. It just doesn't happen. It would be nice to think something like that could go down, but it just doesn't really. Now, one of the things that Hunter Goodman said, I think that jumped out as one of the bigger quotes from the player panel that the Denver media got at the end of Rockies Fest was that he did not want to forget 2025. He did not want to put it past him. He wants to use that as fuel for his fire. He wants that to be something that is a catalyst, because something like that should not happen ever again, losing 119 games. And really, the players can only do so much. It's really about the front office. We know that. The player development side of things, the coaching staff. But for Hunter Goodman, a guy who did everything he could possibly do, winning the Silver Slugger Award as a catcher, the first time in Rockies franchise history, and glad to see that so many folks got a chance to get a photograph next to that trophy during Rockies Fest. That was a cool touch. That was a cool detail of Rockies Fest. I know some of my friends over in the Rocky Mountains chapter of Sabre, which I'm a member of. I randomly bumped into them. They got photos with Hunter Goodman. They decided to get out of the line at the beginning of Rockies Fest because it was a huge line, and that's a tip too. If there's another trophy that they bring out, because it was true of last year with Tovar and Doyle's Gold Glove Awards, there was a long line at various points. Just wait it out, and the line will disappear, and you could go right in, get your photograph. But when they went in, when there wasn't a huge line, Hunter Goodman was there, and they got a photograph with him. That's pretty darn cool. Glad to hear that Felix got a photograph with that trophy too. That's awesome. I love that. But Hunter Goodman, he wants to build on his season from last year, because you want to establish yourself as being consistent, and being consistent is doing that year in and year out. And it was impressive that he did it for the full 6-month season, but now he needs to do it for a second consecutive season. Goodman also looking forward to trying to become more of a leader in the clubhouse. That was the questions that were levied at Ezequiel Tovar and Brenton Doyle last year after they had their breakout 2024 campaigns. And, they're too young. They're a little bit too young and not established enough. So, they're going to lead in their different ways, but it's hard for a young player like Doyle, like Tovar, who's 24 years old, and like Hunter Goodman, to become a leader when they're not themselves established. They might be the top guy of the younger players, but you have to have a certain amount of experience in the major leagues to really get that credit, to have that credential, if you will, to be able to be a full-time leader. And Goodman's not there yet. He said it himself, but he would like to be. And having a great 2026 is going to go a long way for doing that. Jake McCarthy, also a part of that panel for Denver media, talked about there being a hunger within the organization, saying there's a hunger in this building right now, and that Warren Schaefer is the right man for the job. So Jake McCarthy, excited to be on this Rockies team that he's seen a lot from the division, and again, losing 119 games is awful, but that doesn't mean that every single facet, every aspect of the Rockies are or were horrible. And Jake McCarthy, seen it from the NL West, saw the talent, saw the potential and the capability of a lot of these Rockies players who are back for 2026. And with this new coaching staff, that's where that hopium is going to take place and increase the serotonin levels, get you feeling pretty good that perhaps, this could be a franchise-changing season where things turn around. And even if the win-loss record doesn't reflect that entirely, because you lose 104 games in 2026, you won 15 more games than you did last season. So that still can be an improvement. But Jake McCarthy, full believer that, it very well could happen, very well could take place. Manuel, first time in the chat, good seeing you. I was at FanFest yesterday. Great atmosphere and awesome vibes. Really gives you hope for a more competitive team soon. And by the way, Walker signed 2 cards from me. Monfort or Larry? I'm going to say it was Larry because, to my knowledge, I don't think Walker Monfort has a baseball card. Although that is something that's interesting. I imagine Topps Baseball would have thought about that, of like, there's a lot of people that go into making a franchise that go into building contenders in World Series teams, players who, people who don't get baseball cards. In fact, I don't know that managers get cards anymore. They must somewhere out there. But the last couple of years, I typically go standard Topps, maybe Topps Chrome when I collect baseball cards with my dad. But I can't remember even seeing manager cards. But imagine if you had GM cards or president of baseball operations, assistant GMs. That would be different. That certainly would be a different thing. I do like the idea about that, but that's pretty awesome. I mean, 2 baseball cards signed by a Hall of Famer like that, especially because going into the day, you didn't know at what time slot everyone was going to be signing. So for you to get that, that's a pretty cool thing. I don't have very many of those in my collection. Luke saying something I saw that was unexpected was a young fan with a baseball card autograph book had a police escort. Don't know anything about that. Maybe that's a joke based on what's going on in the world today. Someone's got bad hair. I won't say who that is. Felix, already given my thoughts on Nolan Arenado trade to the Diamondbacks. At the beginning of the offseason, I thought going to Arizona would be probably one of the more interesting spots right next to Boston. Boston, it would have been cool seeing Trevor Story and Nolan Arenado play with each other again. But going to the Diamondbacks, that's one extra trip to Coors Field each and every year. In fact, I think that is that the final homestand that the Rockies have? They finish with the Diamondbacks. It might be, but I think that's a good fit for him being a leader on a still relatively young team. Being able to potentially do what Evan Longoria did back in 2023 when he helped get the Diamondbacks to the World Series. So, great deal for the Diamondbacks and for all the people saying, "Oh, see, the Cardinals had to include a ton of money too for Nolan Arenado to get him off the roster." So, ... So what? The Rockies trade was still really bad. And you know what? While it didn't lead to a World Series for the St. Louis Cardinals, Cardinals still won that trade. Cardinals still were able to get a couple postseasons out of, or a couple seasons of contention out of that roster when they had Nolan Arenado. Did not work out like they would have hoped. The Nolan Arenado, won more games with the Rockies than he did with the Cardinals in the postseason. Okay. But at that time, it was still widely regarded as one of the worst trades in Rockies franchise history. No doubt about it. So despite the fact that the Cardinals had to do something similar to get Nolan Arenado off their books, is his own separate thing. It was a bad trade, period. Hopes for Bouchard and Toglia too, more so Montero, who swung at anything. Now we're going back. We're remembering some names and hoping that some of the next generation guys, they don't pan out that same way. We'll see what happens. And final comment: I found the press box area one time, but couldn't find it again. It's on a secret level. Kind of, yeah. It is somewhat on a secret level because the elevator just takes you to the press box. Like that's it. It's also the PNC Club too. So there's that in there. That does share an elevator. And fun fact, if you've ever gone to the PNC Club, it's very nice. It's got a bar in there. Cool. Right behind home plate. A lot of foul balls will go in there. That was originally part of the press box. Back when Coors Field was originally constructed, first season in 1995, and for a decade plus after that, that entire area behind home plate was the press box. That's how many news organizations, that's how many folks covered the Colorado Rockies back then. Now it's less than half the size. And even then, the entire press box doesn't get filled up. So say what you will about that. Rockies utilizing that additional space, bring in some additional revenue. That's a good side of business. It was also cool during Rockies Fest seeing Charlie Condon and Ethan Holiday on the same team for Family Feud. Tons of prospects there. I know a lot of folks, love to see the prospects. Shout out to, I think it was Eric that I got a chance to meet, who recognized me at Fan Fest. That's the one name I remember is of folks saying, "Hey, Patrick Lyons, what's going on, Rockies Insider? Good to see you." Eric, prospects. Did you get a chance to see Ethan Holiday and Charlie Condon? I thought it was pretty cool that Condon was wearing 66. and Ethan Holiday was wearing 88, which made me think two things. One, are they both going to be invited to big league camp? Charlie Condon, is going to be invited to big league camp, as Rockies keep saying, hey, he might be he's starting first baseman on opening day. There's a chance that could happen. I don't know. Ethan Holiday, we'll see if he does get invited. I think he should. I think that, again, could be another positive change for this organization. But the number 88, what's the significance of that? Double Matt Holiday. His father wore number 8. So could Ethan Holiday wear 88 in the majors? Probably not. I think he wants to, carve his own path. But 88 would look pretty interesting. I think Luis Robert Jr. might be like the only guy who does that, and now a member of the New York Mets. But wearing 88, would he wear his father's number 8 when he makes to the majors? I don't know. Very interesting stuff. I've got more thoughts on, the Mets and their 3 superstars now that they've picked up almost out of nowhere with the Freddie Peralta trade after having just acquired Luis Robert Jr. from the White Sox and signing Bo Bichette. They're interesting. The Rangers giving up a bunch of prospects, 5 prospects to the Nationals for Mackenzie Gore, a few seasons of club control. The Rangers still trying to be contenders in the American League West. Jose Ramirez with an extension to stick around in Cleveland and more likely than not finish his career as a Cleveland Guardian. Happy for all the folks in Cleveland and seeing their team spending some money. It's a good time in baseball. We've got the Super Bowl. That's it. After the Super Bowl, it's officially baseball season. Pitchers and catchers reporting. It's a good time. It might be cold outside, might be freezing, might be really, really cold outside, but spring is right around the corner. Hope springs eternal. It's a wonderful time. At Patrick D. Lyons, MLB on X, on Blue Sky, TikTok. Head on over to the Rockies Insider channel over on YouTube. Leave a comment. Always get back to those, even when it's not a live show. Appreciate your support and all of your momentum for dropping by. But unfortunately, that momentum, it's only as good as my next show. So, of course, I'll talk to you then.